In the lush paradise of Maui, a 62-year-old mother was about to teach her 3 children a lesson they would never forget. What began as a simple request for financial help from her adult children turned into a shocking revelation when they responded. With the words no mother ever expects to hear, "You owe us." This unexpected declaration led to an invoice that would change their family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Leilani Kealoha wasn't your typical Hawaiian mother quietly accepting her children's ingratitude. For 3 decades, she had been the family's backbone, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. Known throughout their community for her unwavering dedication and endless sacrifices, she had built a life around supporting her children's dreams, often at the expense of her own. When they confronted her with their entitled demands, she had no idea she was stepping into a moment that would transform their entire relationship. Leilani's response, a meticulously detailed $500,000 invoice, would deliver the most powerful wake-up call her children would ever receive. The Hawaiian sun was already high in the sky when Leilani Kealoha opened her eyes on the morning of June 12, 62 years old today. The number felt strange to her, a milestone she hadn't really prepared for. She lay still for a moment in her bedroom, listening to the familiar sounds of her North Shore neighborhood, the distant crash of famous Hawaiian waves, the gentle rustle of palm trees swaying in the trade winds, and the melodic songs of native birds greeting the morning. Her arthritis gave a twinge of discomfort as she slipped out of bed, her feet finding the smooth koa wood floors that her late husband Keone had installed himself 27 years ago. The house told their story in every corner, dings in the kitchen doorframe from when her son Kai had practiced indoor skateboarding despite her protests, a small watermark on the dining table from when her daughter Malia's science experiment had gone awry, and Nanny's height measurements still penciled on the wall of the pantry. Leilani padded to the kitchen, her morning routine as predictable as the island tides. Coffee first. Always coffee first. As her Kona blend began brewing, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, she reached for her phone, a device her children had insisted she learn to use to stay connected. The screen showed no missed calls, no messages, no birthday wishes. It was only 7 a.m., she reminded herself. Still early. She carried her coffee to the lanai, settling into the hand-woven chair that had been a gift from Keone's mother. The June morning carried the perfect balance of warmth and breeze that made Hawaiian living feel like paradise. Her garden spread out before her, native plants and flowers that she had cultivated over decades, each with its own story and significance. The yellow hibiscus, Hawaii's state flower, was Keone's favorite. "As bright as your smile," he used to say, planting a kiss on her cheek. "Happy birthday to me," she whispered to the flowers, the words carrying no joy, only a hollow acknowledgement of another year past. Back inside, muscle memory guided her through making Keone's favorite breakfast, loco moco with perfectly crispy spam, eggs over easy, and rice topped with gravy made from scratch. It wasn't until she'd set 2 plates on the table that reality struck her anew. She was alone. She'd been alone for 3 years, 4 months, and 22 days. But some mornings, especially on important days, her heart forgot. The food grew cold as she checked her phone again. 8:30 a.m. Still nothing from any of her 3 children. No call from Kai, her oldest, living on the Big Island with his wife and 2 children. No text from Malia, her middle child, busy with her surgical residency in Honolulu. No emoji-filled message from Nanny, her youngest, who had moved to the mainland for college and stayed for a job in Seattle's tech industry. The living room called to her, and she settled into Keone's old recliner, the fabric worn smooth by years of use. The walls around her told the story of a life well lived, family photos in handcrafted frames, children's artwork now yellowed with age, certificates of accomplishment, and the wedding portrait where she and Keone looked impossibly young, standing on this very property when it had been nothing but undeveloped land and dreams. Her mind drifted to birthdays past when this house had been the center of the Kealoha family universe. She'd spent weeks planning celebrations, Kai surfing themed parties, Malia's science experiment gatherings, and Nanny's elaborate artistic showcases. The tradition had continued even after they'd grown and moved away. Every birthday, graduation, and significant life event had been marked within these walls. She'd driven to airports countless times to collect grandchildren for summer visits, turned the guest room into a temporary nursery when Malia needed help during medical school, kept the refrigerator stocked with everyone's favorite foods just in case they came home unexpectedly. When had it stopped? When had she become the one waiting for calls instead of receiving them? When had her birthday become just another day on everyone else's calendar? The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted her melancholy. Akela Mahalana's cheerful voice called out in musical Hawaiian accented English, "Aloha kakahayaka, Leilani. How are you feeling today?" Akela appeared in the doorway, her scrubs adorned with tropical flowers, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. At 40, she radiated the kind of energy Leilani remembered having once upon a time. Akela's twice weekly visits had become one of the few constants in Leilani's life since Keone's death, a brief infusion of warmth and genuine care in an increasingly lonely existence. "I'm fine, just fine," Leilani replied automatically. The lie came as easily as breathing. She'd perfected the art of appearing fine over the decades, through Keone's battle with cancer, her own financial struggles after his death, and the crushing loneliness that had settled over her like volcanic ash. Akela busied herself taking Leilani's blood pressure and checking her medication organizer, chattering about her son's hula competition and her second job at the hospital. It wasn't until she was updating Leilani's chart that she paused, pen hovering over the paper. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wait, June 12th. Isn't today your birthday, Leilani? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Leilani felt her carefully constructed facade of contentment begin to crack. "Yes," she said simply, her voice smaller than she intended. Akela's face transformed, confusion giving way to concern and then to something that looked suspiciously like anger. "Your birthday, and you're here alone? Where is your family? Where are your children?" The questions pierced Leilani's chest like arrows. Where indeed? Kai was probably managing his tour boat company on the Big Island, taking wealthy tourists to see dolphins and whales, building the business he dreamed of since childhood, a dream funded by the college money Leilani and Keone had saved for him. Malia was likely in surgery or making rounds, building the medical career that Leilani had supported by watching her children during medical school, cooking meals that could be easily reheated, and sending money for books and supplies when scholarships fell short. And Nanny. Nanny could be anywhere, lost in the tech world that had seduced her away from the islands, designing apps and websites that Leilani barely understood but had funded with the money from the second mortgage on this very house. "They're busy," Leilani said, the words tasting like ash. "They have their own lives." Akela set down her medical bag and sat on the couch across from Leilani, her professional demeanor giving way to something more personal. "Leilani, you raised 3 children as a teacher's salary. You told me how you and Keone worked extra jobs to help pay for Kai's first boat. How you took care of Malia's children during her first year of residency. How you sold your mother's jewelry to help Nanny with the deposit on her first apartment in Seattle." "That's what parents do," Leilani interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. "And what do children do for their parents?" Akela asked gently. The question settled between them like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of truth that Leilani had been avoiding for months, maybe years. When was the last time any of them had called just to ask how she was feeling? When was the last time someone had visited without needing something, alone time, childcare, a place to stay? During island hopping? After Akela left with promises to call later and repeated birthday wishes, Leilani found herself standing in the center of her living room, really seeing it for the first time in years. The family photos stared back at her accusingly, images of children who had grown into adults she barely recognized, strangers who shared her DNA but not her values, not her understanding of what family meant. She walked to the kitchen window that looked out over her neighborhood, watching her neighbors go about their Tuesday morning routines. The Kapwakilas across the street were loading their grandchildren into their SUV, probably taking them to the beach. The Nakawas next door were both retired now, spending their mornings tending to their garden together, growing traditional Hawaiian plants and vegetables. Everyone seemed to have someone, everyone except her. The anger came slowly at first, like lava beginning to simmer beneath the surface. It started as disappointment, transformed into hurt, and finally crystallized into something harder and more definitive. She was tired. Tired of making excuses for them. Tired of pretending their neglect didn't wound her. Tired of being the one who always called, always reached out, always forgave. Most of all, she was tired of being invisible in the lives of the people she had sacrificed everything to raise. Her reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman who had spent 6 decades putting everyone else first. Her black hair, now streaked with silver, was still neatly styled from yesterday's appointment with her hairdresser, a weekly ritual she maintained not for herself but in case one of them decided to visit unexpectedly. Her house was still immaculate. Guest rooms always ready. Refrigerator stocked with favorites they no longer ate. Traditions maintained for celebrations that no longer happened. The phone sat silent on the counter, its silence more eloquent than any words. 62 years old and not one of her 3 children had remembered the day that marked her arrival in this world, the beginning of the life she had dedicated entirely to their well-being. Something fundamental shifted inside Leilani Kealoha in that moment. A lifetime of selflessness suddenly felt less like virtue and more like a prison she had built for herself, one considerate act at a time. She thought of Keone, who had always encouraged her to dream bigger, to want more for herself. "You give too much of yourself away, my sweet Lei," he used to say. "Save some for us. Save some for you." She hadn't listened then. She'd been too busy being the perfect mother, the ideal wife, the reliable friend. But Keone was gone, and she was alone with the consequences of a lifetime spent in service to people who had apparently forgotten her value. Then, last week, something happened that pushed her beyond her breaking point. All three children had called within days of each other, not to check on her, not to catch up, but to ask for money. Kai needed $15,000 for boat repairs. Malia wanted $20,000 for a deposit on a condo near the hospital. Nanny required $10,000 to tide her over during a company restructure. When Leilani had gently suggested that perhaps it was time for them to stand on their own financially, the responses had stunned her into silence. "But you owe us," Kai had said, his voice filled with genuine belief. "After all, you're our mother. That's your job. We wouldn't need money if you and Dad had set us up better," Malia had added, her voice clinical and detached. "My friends' parents gave them trust funds. It's not like you need it," Nanny had argued. "You're just sitting in that big house all alone. What else are you going to spend it on?" The decision came to her with startling clarity, like lightning illuminating the night sky. She would not continue to be the family ATM without acknowledgement. She would not spend whatever years remained feeling guilty for having needs of her own. With steady hands that belied the magnitude of what she was about to do, Leilani reached for her laptop, the one Nanny had insisted she buy to stay connected, and opened a spreadsheet program. At the top, she typed, "Invoice, the cost of raising ungrateful children." Then, methodically, she began to calculate private school tuition for all three children, college expenses not covered by scholarships, down payments on first cars, medical expenses, extracurricular activities, Kai's surfing competitions, Malia's science camps, Nanny's art classes, the second mortgage they'd taken out to fund Nanny's tech boot camp, the retirement funds they'd tapped to help Kai start his business, the jewelry she'd sold to help Malia through a tough time in medical school. She included labor costs too, 18 years of cooking, cleaning, and laundry for each child, transportation to and from activities, hours spent helping with homework, attending school functions, and volunteering for field trips. The emotional labor of raising three distinct personalities through childhood illnesses, teenage heartbreaks, and young adult crises. By the time she finished, the total stood at $489,237. 62, she rounded it up to an even $500,000, then carefully formatted the document to look like a professional invoice, complete with payment terms, due upon receipt of appreciation. At the bottom, she added a note, "Consider this statement a reflection of everything I've invested in your lives without complaint. I don't actually expect payment, but I do expect respect. I am not an ATM. I am your mother. And contrary to your belief, that doesn't mean I owe you anything more than the love and support I've already given. You, however, owe me at least the courtesy of remembering my birthday." As her finger hovered over the send button, Leilani felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the power of standing up for herself. She was finally ready to start living for herself. She hit send. Dr. Helena Wong arrived at 2:30 p.m. sharp, just as she'd promised. Leilani watched from her living room window as the therapist parked her blue Prius in the driveway, noting how she paused to admire the plumeria tree in full bloom before walking to the front door. She'd spent the hours since sending the invoice in a strange state of suspended animation, part terror, part exhilaration, all determination. When the doorbell chimed, she opened it to find a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and an easy smile. She wore a simple linen dress that spoke of island sophistication and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd navigated countless difficult family situations. "Mrs. Kealoha?" Dr. Helena Wong. "Thank you for calling the Family Reconciliation Center today. Come in, please." Leilani stepped aside, suddenly acutely aware of her house through a stranger's eyes. "Can I offer you something to drink? Water? Iced tea?" "Iced tea would be wonderful, thank you." Dr. Wong followed her to the kitchen, her trained gaze already cataloging details, the spotless countertops, the family photos arranged precisely. On the refrigerator, the abundance of natural light streaming through the large windows facing the garden. As she handed the glass to Dr. Wong, Leilani settled into her favorite kitchen chair, the one where she'd sat for thousands of meals, homework sessions, and heart-to-heart conversations. So, tell me what prompted your call today, Dr. Wong said, taking a sip of her tea. I sent my 3 adult children an invoice for $500,000 this morning, Leilani said simply. To her credit, Dr. Wong didn't spill her tea, though her eyebrows did rise slightly. I see. And this was in response to? They all asked me for money last week. Significant amounts. When I suggested perhaps it was time for them to handle their own finances, they told me I owed them. Because I'm their mother. The bitterness in her voice surprised even Leilani. Dr. Wong nodded thoughtfully. And how did that make you feel? Like I failed, Leilani admitted, the words catching in her throat. Failed to raise children who understand gratitude. Failed to create adults who see me as a person with my own needs, not just an extension of themselves. Parents often equate their children's behavior with their success or failure as parents, Dr. Wong observed. But adult children make their own choices, influenced by many factors beyond parenting. Today is my birthday, Leilani said abruptly. I'm 62 years old, and not one of them remembered. Not even a text message. Dr. Wong's expression softened. That must be very painful. It's not the first time. Last year, Malia remembered 3 days late. Kai sent a generic e-card a week later. Nanny didn't acknowledge it at all. Leilani looked out the window at her garden. My husband always made my birthdays special. He'd wake me with plumeria flowers and coffee. Plan little surprises throughout the day. He taught the children to make me cards, to save their allowance for small gifts. She smiled sadly. He's been gone 3 years now, and it's like they've forgotten everything he taught them. Grief changes family dynamics, Dr. Wong said gently. Sometimes children withdraw because their parents' pain is too difficult to witness. It's more than that, Leilani insisted. They've become entitled. They expect me to continue sacrificing for them, without giving anything in return. Not even basic courtesy. Hence the invoice, Dr. Wong concluded. Yes. Leilani felt a flash of defiance. I wanted them to see, in black and white, everything I've given them. Everything Keone and I sacrificed. I don't actually expect them to pay it, but I want them to acknowledge it. And have they responded? Not yet. Leilani glanced at her silent phone. But they will. Dr. Wong spent the next hour asking questions about Leilani's relationship with each child, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. She listened as Leilani described Kai's transformation from a responsible young man to someone who seemed to take pride in financial brinkmanship, always one crisis away from disaster. She nodded thoughtfully as Leilani explained Malia's clinical detachment, her tendency to analyze family relationships like medical cases, without emotional investment. And she showed particular interest in Nanny's journey from island girl to mainland tech worker, adopting new values that seemed at odds with her Hawaiian upbringing. It sounds like you're mourning more than your husband, Dr. Wong observed as their session drew to a close. You're mourning the family you thought you had. Leilani felt tears threaten for the first time that day. Yes, she whispered. That's exactly it. The invoice was a cry for acknowledgement, Dr. Wong said, closing her notebook. A demand to be seen as a person with feelings. Not just as a resource. There's nothing wrong with that, Mrs. Kealoha. Sometimes family systems need a shock to change entrenched patterns. As Dr. Wong prepared to leave, she paused at the door. I'd like to continue working with you, if you're willing. And when your children respond, because they will, I'd like to offer family sessions. This could be an opportunity for real transformation. You think they'll agree to that? Leilani asked skeptically. I think your invoice has already started a process that won't be easily dismissed, Dr. Wong replied with a small smile. Happy birthday, by the way. It was just past 9 p.m. when Leilani's phone began to ring. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Kai. Mom? His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. What the hell is this invoice? Is this some kind of joke? Leilani took a deep breath, steadying herself against the kitchen counter. No joke, Kai. Just an accounting. An accounting? For what? Being our mother? That's ridiculous. Parents don't keep score, don't they? Leilani asked quietly. Isn't that exactly what you did when you told me I owe you financial support because I'm your mother? Weren't you keeping score then? The line went quiet except for Kai's heavy breathing. Then, this is about the boat money, isn't it? Look, business has been slow, and the repairs are essential. I'm not asking for a handout, I'm asking for an investment. No, Kikana, Leilani said, using the childhood nickname that meant, beloved son. This isn't about the boat money. This is about what today is. A pause. What do you mean? Today is June 12th, Kai. Another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear him searching his mental calendar, trying to place the significance. Oh. His voice lost its defensive edge. Your birthday. Yes. I've been so busy. With the boat situation. I meant to call, but then the mechanic gave me the estimate, and I just forgot, Leilani finished for him. Just like last year. And the year before. That's not fair, Kai protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you called just to see how I'm doing? Not because you needed something, not because there was a crisis, but just to ask about my life? The silence that followed her question spoke volumes. I have to go, Kai said finally. We'll talk about this later. Will we? Leilani asked, but the line had already gone dead. Within minutes, her phone was buzzing again. This time, it was Malia, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency that had made her successful in medicine and emotionally distant from her family. Mom, I just got an email with an invoice attached. Kai called me in a panic. What's going on? Hello to you too, Malia. I'm fine, thanks for asking, Leilani said, settling into her patio chair. I'm serious, Mom. This is bizarre behavior. Are you feeling alright? Should I be concerned about your cognitive function? The assumption that her decision must stem from mental decline rather than legitimate grievance struck Leilani like a physical blow. Even now, her middle child couldn't conceive that she might be acting from her own agency rather than confusion. I'm not senile, Malia. I'm hurt. Hurt? By what? By being forgotten. By being taken for granted. By having 3 children who see me as a resource rather than a person. Another pause. When Malia spoke again, her voice had shifted slightly, carrying the first hint of uncertainty Leilani had heard from her in years. Mom, it's been a busy month. The hospital has been understaffed, and I'm covering extra shifts. I barely have time to sleep, let alone, it's been a busy 3 years, Malia. Ever since your father died and you decided grief was an inconvenience rather than a process. The accusation hung between them like a diagnosis no one wanted to acknowledge. That's not fair, Malia said, but her clinical detachment was cracking. I mourned Dad in my own way. Did you? Or did you just bury yourself in work so you wouldn't have to feel anything? Before Malia could respond, call waiting. Interrupted. Nanny's name appeared on the screen. I have to take this, Leilani said. But Malia, think about when you last called me just to talk. Not because you needed childcare or money or had a crisis, but just because you wanted to know how I was doing. She switched to Nanny's call, bracing herself for a different kind of conversation. What the actual hell, Mom? Each word was punctuated with anger. An invoice? Are you kidding me? I'm sitting in a coffee shop, and I almost spit my latte all over my laptop when I opened that email. Of all her children, Nanny had always been the most emotionally volatile, the one most likely to react with dramatic flair. She was also the one who had moved furthest from her Hawaiian roots, both geographically and spiritually. Hello, Nanny. It's nice to hear your voice too. Don't passive-aggressive me right now. This is seriously messed up. You don't bill your children for raising them. I'm not billing you for raising you, Leilani corrected gently. I'm showing you the cost of taking me for granted. Taking you for, Mom, I call you every couple of weeks. Do you? The last time we spoke was 47 days ago, when you called to ask for money because your company was restructuring. Before that, it was 3 months, when you needed my recipe for banana bread to impress your boyfriend's parents. The silence on the other end told Leilani her youngest was mentally reviewing their recent communications and finding the evidence damning. I've been busy, Nanny said finally, her voice smaller. Seattle is expensive, and this job transition has been stressful, and today is my birthday, Nanny. I'm 62 years old today. The sharp intake of breath was audible. Oh God. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had it in my calendar, I swear. But with everything happening at work, there's always something, isn't there? Work deadlines, relationship drama, financial stress. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. Leilani paused. Your father used to say that. Don't bring Dad into this. Why not? He's the one who taught me that family should come first. Apparently, that lesson didn't stick with any of you. After the calls ended, Leilani sat on her lanai, watching the stars appear over the Pacific. The night air carried the scent of plumeria and salt, a combination that had always brought her comfort. Tonight, it couldn't ease the ache in her chest. Her phone buzzed with text messages. From Kai, we need to talk about this. I'm flying to Maui tomorrow. This invoice thing is crazy, but we can work it out. From Malia, I've cleared my schedule. For the weekend. Arriving Friday afternoon. We should discuss this with a professional mediator. From Nanny, getting on a red-eye tonight. Land at 7 a.m. Please don't do anything drastic before we talk. Leilani looked at the messages, a sad smile playing on her lips. An invoice had accomplished what years of gentle requests hadn't, it had gotten their attention. The question now was whether that attention would translate to lasting change or just another cycle of crisis management followed by neglect. As she prepared for bed, she found herself standing before the family altar she'd maintained since Keone's death, a small table with his photograph, surrounded by shells they'd collected together and the Hawaiian quilt his mother had made for their wedding. "Well, Keone," she whispered to his smiling image, "I finally did it. I stood up for myself, just like you always told me to." She touched the frame gently. "I don't know if it will change anything, but at least they're listening now." She fell asleep with Keone's voice in her memory, "My brave Lei, always putting everyone else first. It's time you remembered your own worth." The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting golden stripes across Leilani's bedroom floor as she awakened to the unfamiliar sound of voices in her kitchen. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the cadence of her children's voices, Kai's deep baritone, Malia's precise diction, and Nanny's rapid-fire delivery punctuated with mainland slang that had once been foreign to her island tongue. They had all arrived, just as they'd promised. Kai had taken the first ferry from the Big Island, arriving with the sunrise. Malia had caught an early flight from Honolulu, her hospital duties delegated for the first time in years. And Nanny, true to her word, had taken the red-eye from Seattle, her eyes shadowed with fatigue but bright with determination. Leilani dressed carefully, selecting a flowing sundress in a vibrant blue pattern that Keone had always loved. Ocean colors for my ocean girl, he'd called them. She pinned her silver-streaked hair up with the mother-of-pearl clips that had been her mother's, applied a touch of lipstick, and took a deep breath. This confrontation had been years in the making. When she entered the kitchen, all three of her children fell silent, their expressions a mixture of concern, defensiveness, and, she was surprised to note, genuine worry. "Mom," Kai began, stepping forward. At 36, her firstborn had grown into his father's build, broad-shouldered and solid, with the weathered tan of someone who made his living on the water. "We need to talk about this invoice situation." "Good morning to you too, Kai," Leilani said calmly, moving to the coffee pot that someone, probably Malia, always the early riser, had already prepared. "And good morning, Malia, Nanny. It's good to see all of you. Even if it took a financial statement to make it happen." Malia, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, her medical precision evident in even her casual clothing, cleared her throat. "Mom, we're concerned about this behavior. It's out of character." "Is it?" Leilani asked, pouring herself coffee and taking a seat at the kitchen table. "Or is it simply the first time I've stood up for myself in ways you couldn't ignore?" Nanny, her hair dyed a shade of purple that would have been unthinkable in their small Hawaiian community, fidgeted with her smartphone. "Mom, we get that you're upset about the birthday thing. And we're really sorry about that. But this invoice, it's kind of extreme, don't you think? More extreme than all three of my children telling me I owe them financial support because I'm their mother?" Leilani took a sip of her coffee, her gaze steady. "More extreme than being treated like an ATM instead of a person?" The silence that followed her question was heavy with uncomfortable recognition. "Look," Kai said finally, his tone conciliatory, "we've all been under a lot of pressure lately. The tourism industry is struggling post-pandemic, and the boat repairs, this isn't about the boat repairs, Kai," Leilani interrupted gently. "Or Malia's condo deposit, or Nanny's cash flow problems during her job transition. This is about something much more fundamental." "Which is?" Malia asked, her clinical detachment a thin veneer over growing discomfort. "Gratitude," Leilani said simply. "Recognition. Seeing me as a person with my own needs and feelings, not just as your support system." She stood, moving to the window that overlooked her garden. "Your father and I gave you everything we could, not just materially, but emotionally. We supported your dreams, celebrated your successes, and helped you through failures. We taught you to be kind, to be respectful, to remember what matters. Somewhere along the way, you all forgot those lessons." "That's not fair," Nanny protested. "We love you, Mom. We're just busy with our own lives now. Too busy to remember my birthday? Too busy to call unless you need something? Too busy to visit unless there's a crisis?" Leilani turned back to face them. "That's not love, Nanny. That's convenience." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of discomfort that spread across each of their faces. "When was the last time any of you asked me about my dreams? My plans? My hopes for whatever years I have left?" Leilani continued, her voice gaining strength with each question. "When was the last time any of you treated me as Leilani, not just as Mom? Kai shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. Malia's professional composure cracked slightly, her hands tightening around her coffee mug. Nanny's eyes filled with tears. She quickly tried to blink away. I didn't create that invoice because I expect payment, Leilani said more gently. I created it to show you what you've taken for granted. To make visible what has been invisible to you, the lifetime of sacrifices, the ongoing support, the unconditional love that you now treat as an obligation I owe you, rather than a gift freely given. We don't think that, Malia began, but her voice lacked conviction. Don't you? Leilani challenged. Kai, what did you say when I suggested I couldn't help with the boat repairs this time? Kai's sun-weathered face flushed. I might have implied that as my mother, you should want to help me succeed. Malia, what did you say when I explained that helping with your condo deposit would mean dipping into my retirement fund? Malia's clinical detachment wavered. I said that parents are supposed to help their children establish themselves, and that your generation had it easier with housing costs. And Nanny, what was your response when I told you I was concerned about my own financial security if I kept helping all of you? Nanny winced. I said you had this big house and no expenses, so you should be helping us instead of hoarding money. Leilani nodded, letting the weight of their words settle around them. Now you understand why I created the invoice. Not to demand repayment, but to show you that my support has never been an obligation, it's been a choice. A choice made from love, not duty. And it's a choice I'm still willing to make, but only if that love is reciprocated with basic respect and consideration. The kitchen fell silent except for the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore and the gentle ticking of the koa wood clock Keone had made for their 10th anniversary. I've arranged for us to meet with Dr. Helena Wong this afternoon, Leilani continued. She's a family therapist who specializes in adult family relationships. I'd like all of you to join me. Therapy? Kai's voice carried the familiar resistance he'd shown toward emotional work since adolescence. Yes, therapy, Leilani confirmed. Because this isn't just about forgotten birthdays or financial requests. This is about rebuilding a family that has lost its way. To her surprise, it was Malia who agreed first. I think that's a good idea. I've been recommending therapy to my patients for years. It's time I took my own medical advice. Nanny nodded slowly. I've been seeing someone in Seattle, actually. For anxiety. It's been helpful. All eyes turned to Kai, who looked trapped between his natural resistance and the weight of family expectation. Fine, he said finally. But I'm not convinced we need some stranger telling us how to be a family. That's not what therapy is, Leilani said gently. It's about having someone help us see the patterns we're stuck in and find healthier ways to connect. As they prepared for the appointment, an awkward truce settled over the house. Kai retreated to the lanai, making business calls with the forced enthusiasm of someone avoiding difficult conversations. Malia methodically inspected the contents of Leilani's medicine cabinet and refrigerator, making notes about prescriptions that needed refilling and foods that were past their expiration date. Nanny flitted between rooms, taking photos of childhood mementos and posting them on social media with wistful captions about home. None of them, Leilani noted with sad clarity, actually asked her how she'd been spending her days, what she'd been thinking about, or who she'd become in their absence. They were relating to the mother they remembered, not the woman she was now. Dr. Wong's office occupied the ground floor of a restored plantation-style building in Lahaina, its wide veranda and tropical gardens creating an atmosphere of calm. Before they even stepped inside, the waiting room featured local artwork, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, and the subtle scent of plumeria from fresh flowers on the reception desk. The Kealoha family, Dr. Wong greeted them warmly, emerging from her office. Thank you all for coming. Please, come in. The therapy room was spacious and airy, with large windows overlooking a private garden. Comfortable chairs were arranged in a circle, with no barriers between them, a physical representation of the open communication Dr. Wong hoped to facilitate. I'd like to start by acknowledging the courage it takes for a family to come to therapy together, Dr. Wong began once they were all seated. It means you're willing to look at difficult truths and make changes. That's already a significant step. Leilani noticed how her children responded differently to this simple affirmation. Kai straightened his shoulders as if accepting a challenge, Malia nodded clinically as if confirming a diagnosis, and Nanny visibly relaxed at the validation of their effort. Leilani has shared with me her perspective on what brought you all here today, Dr. Wong continued. But I'd like to hear from each of you. What do you understand to be the reason for this session? Mom sent us an invoice for raising us, Kai said bluntly. $500,000 for doing what parents are supposed to do anyway. I see, Dr. Wong said, her expression neutral. And how did that make you feel, Kai? Angry. Confused. He paused, then added more quietly, guilty. Guilty about what specifically? Kai stared at his hands, calloused from years of working on boats. For not calling on her birthday. For asking for money when I know she's retired. For treating her like she owes me something. Dr. Wong nodded. Thank you for that honesty. Malia, what about you? Malia, sitting with perfect posture, her medical training evident in her analytical approach, took a moment before responding. I felt indignant at first. Then defensive. Then, when I really thought about it, ashamed. Her voice, usually so confident when discussing medical matters, wavered slightly. I've been so focused on my career, on proving myself in a male-dominated specialty, that I've compartmentalized my family relationships. Treated them as secondary. And what made that compartmentalization feel necessary? Dr. Wong asked. Efficiency, Malia answered immediately, then frowned. No, that's not entirely honest. Distance. Emotional distance. It's easier to focus when I don't have to feel too much. Easier, perhaps, but at what cost? Dr. Wong asked gently. Malia glanced at her mother, then quickly away. At the cost of the relationships that matter most. Dr. Wong turned to Nanny, who was fidgeting with the jade bracelet Leilani had given her for her 16th birthday. And you, Nanny? What was your reaction to the invoice? Shock, at first. Then this weird mixture of offense and recognition? Nanny spoke with the rapid cadence she'd developed since moving to the mainland. Part of me was thinking, you can't bill your kids for raising them, but another part was scrolling through the itemized list thinking, wow, I had no idea that art school cost so much, or, I forgot mom sold her mother's jewelry to help me with that first apartment deposit. And beyond the specific items, what did the invoice represent to you? Nanny's eyes filled with tears. That I've been taking mom for granted. That I've been so focused on becoming something different, something mainland, something tech, something not island, that I've been pretending the foundation I was built on doesn't matter. Dr. Wong nodded thoughtfully. These are all powerful insights. Leilani, what's it like hearing your children's reflections? Leilani, who had been quiet throughout this exchange, felt her throat tighten with emotion. It's validating and painful. Because I don't want them to feel guilty or ashamed. I just want them to see me, not just as their mother, but as a person with feelings, with needs, with a life that continues even when they're not in it. That's a profound distinction, Dr. Wong observed. There's a difference between wanting your children to feel bad about their behavior and wanting them to recognize the impact of that behavior. For the next hour, Dr. Wong guided them through a structured conversation about family patterns, how Leilani's tendency to give without setting boundaries had created an expectation of endless availability, how each child had developed their own strategy for managing emotional distance, how Keone's death had disrupted their family system without them developing new ways to connect. I'd like to suggest an exercise, Dr. Wong said as their session neared its end. Something for each of you to do before our next meeting. She turned to Kai. I'd like you to spend one day helping your mother with whatever she needs, house repairs, garden work, errands, without checking your phone or making business calls. Just be fully present, as she has been for you countless times. Kai nodded, looking both challenged and intrigued. Malia, I'd like you to ask your mother 3 questions each day, not about her health or practical matters, but about her thoughts, her feelings, her experiences. And then really listen to the answers without offering solutions or judgments. Malia looked uncomfortable but committed, making a mental note as if adding it to her rounds. Nanny, I'd like you to share something meaningful from your current life with your mother each day, not just surface updates or achievements, but vulnerabilities, uncertainties, joys. Create a bridge between who you are becoming and where you came from. Nanny twisted her bracelet but nodded agreement. And Leilani, Dr. Wong continued, I'd like you to practice expressing your needs directly, without apology or justification. When you want something, ask for it clearly. When something hurts you, say so immediately. No more silently carrying burdens until they become too heavy. Leilani felt a flutter of anxiety at this assignment. That won't be easy. No, Dr. Wong agreed with a gentle smile. Changing lifelong patterns never is. But it's necessary for healing. As they left the therapy session, the air between them felt different, charged with awareness and the tentative hope of change. They walked along Front Street in Lahaina, the historic whaling town now transformed into a tourist destination, each lost in their own thoughts. I'm hungry, Kai said suddenly. Let's get lunch at Aloha Mixed Plate. Like we used to when we were kids. The simple suggestion, a family meal, without agenda or obligation, felt like the first tender shoot pushing through soil after a long drought. The restaurant hadn't changed much over the years, still casual, still serving the plate lunches that reflected Hawaii's multicultural heritage, still offering views of the ocean where whales breached in winter months. They found a table overlooking the water, ordered familiar favorites, and fell into an uncomfortable silence. "So," Nanny said finally, her mainland directness breaking the tension, $500,000, huh? That's a lot of diaper changes. The absurdity of reducing their childhood to monetary terms struck them all at once, and suddenly they were laughing, tentatively at first, then with increasing abandon, until tears streamed down their faces. And other diners were staring. "Your face when you opened that email," Malia gasped between laughs. "I wish I could have seen it." "I was in a Seattle coffee shop," Nanny admitted, wiping her eyes. "I literally spit my latte onto my laptop. Had to get the keyboard replaced." "I was on the boat," Kai added. "Dropped my phone in the water in shock. Had to dive for it." "Good thing I made it waterproof," Leilani said mildly, and they dissolved into laughter again. When the food arrived, they fell into a more comfortable rhythm, sharing dishes family style as they had throughout childhood. Conversations drifted towards safer topics: Kai's new ecotourism initiative, Malia's research on tropical diseases, Nanny's latest app development. Yet beneath the surface pleasantries, Leilani could sense each of them processing the therapy session, reconsidering long-held assumptions about their family dynamics. After lunch, they strolled through Lahaina, past art galleries and souvenir shops, ice cream parlors and historic sites. At the famous banyan tree, planted in 1873 and now covering nearly an acre with its massive aerial roots and branches, they paused to sit on a bench in its shade. "We used to climb this tree," Kai remembered, looking up at the massive canopy. "Dad would lift us onto the lower branches, and we'd pretend we were monkeys. Until that security guard yelled at us," Malia added with a smile. "Dad was so embarrassed. But he defended us," Nanny recalled. "Children need to connect with nature," he told that guard. "He wouldn't back down." "Your father never backed down when it came to protecting his family," Leilani said softly. "It was his greatest strength, and sometimes his greatest challenge." "What do you mean?" Kai asked, genuinely curious about this perspective on his father he'd never considered. Leilani looked out at the ocean, gathering her thoughts. "Keone was a protector by nature. He wanted to shield all of you, and me, from hardship. Sometimes that meant taking on too much himself, working too many jobs, saying yes when he should have said no. He thought that's what love looked like, sacrifice without limits." "Sounds familiar," Malia observed quietly, giving her mother a knowing look. "Yes," Leilani acknowledged with a sad smile. "We reinforced that pattern in each other. And unintentionally, we taught it to you, that love means giving until there's nothing left, that asking for help is weakness, that family means unconditional support without reciprocity." The breeze rustled the banyan's leaves, creating a soothing backdrop to this difficult conversation. "I don't want that for any of you," Leilani continued. "I don't want Kai working himself to exhaustion trying to keep his business afloat without asking for help. I don't want Malia compartmentalizing her emotions until she can't access them at all. I don't want Nanny running away from her heritage because she thinks she has to choose between her roots and her future." She looked at each of her children in turn, really seeing them, not as the children they had been, but as the adults they were struggling to become. "And I don't want to be the mother who enables unhealthy patterns because I'm afraid of losing my children's love if I set boundaries." Nanny reached for her hand, her purple hair glinting in the dappled sunlight. "We wouldn't love you less if you said no sometimes, Mom. Wouldn't you?" Leilani asked gently. "When I suggested I couldn't help with your financial requests, each of you responded with some version of, 'But you're supposed to, you're our mother.' None of them could deny this truth. That ends now," Leilani said firmly. "I will always be your mother, and I will always love you. But my love will no longer look like unlimited financial support, or silent acceptance of being taken for granted, or making myself smaller so you can feel bigger. What will it look like?" Kai asked, genuinely uncertain about this new paradigm. "It will look like truth," Leilani answered. "Like mutual respect. Like a relationship between adults who value each other's wholeness, not just what they can give or take." As they walked back to the car, something had shifted between them, subtle but significant, like the first turn of the tide before it becomes visible to the casual observer. That evening, as the sun set over the Pacific in a blaze of orange and pink, they gathered on Leilani's lanai. Kai had spent the afternoon fixing loose boards on the deck and trimming back the plumeria tree that had grown too close to the roof, simple tasks he'd noticed needed doing, without being asked. Malia had cooked dinner, recreating Keone's famous garlic shrimp recipe from memory, asking Leilani questions about her father's cooking techniques that led to stories she'd never heard before. Nanny had shown her mother photos of her life in Seattle, not just the polished social media versions, but the real moments, her tiny apartment with mismatched furniture, the community garden plot where she grew Hawaiian herbs to feel connected to home, the therapy journal she'd been keeping to process her anxiety. As darkness fell, Kai brought out a small cake with a single candle. "It's not much," he said, suddenly shy. "But happy belated birthday, Mom." Leilani felt tears spring to her eyes, not from the gesture itself, but from the awareness behind it. They were trying. It was imperfect and awkward and long overdue, but they were trying. "Make a wish," Malia urged, her clinical detachment softened by the evening's intimacy. Leilani closed her eyes, thinking not of what she wanted to receive, but of what she hoped they all might become, a family redefined by mutual respect rather than obligation, by joy rather than duty, by choice rather than expectation. She blew out the candle, opened her eyes, and looked at her 3 children gathered around her, flawed, complex, struggling, but here. When it came time for the traditional birthday toast, Kai clinked his glass to gather everyone's attention. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying across the now quiet gathering, "our family was at a crossroads. Mom had reached her breaking point with 3 adult children who had forgotten the meaning of reciprocity." He smiled ruefully. "Actually, that's too generous. We hadn't forgotten, we had never really learned it. We had been taking from her our entire lives without understanding the cost." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd, as many parents nodded in understanding. "So she sent us an invoice," Kai continued, causing those who hadn't heard the story to gasp in surprise. $500,000 for raising 3 ungrateful children. Itemized, documented, and absolutely non-negotiable. Laughter mixed with sounds of approval from the audience. At first, we were shocked. Offended, even angry, Malia took over the narrative, stepping forward to stand beside her brother. "How dare our mother quantify her parental obligation in monetary terms? Wasn't raising us her responsibility, her choice? Didn't she owe us ongoing support because she had brought us into this world?" She shook her head at her former entitlement. "We actually said these things aloud, with complete conviction. That's how disconnected we were from the reality of what it means to be in relationship with another human being, even one who happened to give birth to us. But here's what we didn't understand then," Nanny added, completing the sibling trio. "The invoice was never about money. It was about recognition. About making visible what had become invisible through years of taking for granted. About establishing that our mother is a whole person with her own needs, dreams, and right to self-determination, not just an extension of our identities or a resource for our convenience." The 3 siblings turned toward Leilani, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Mom," Kai said, his voice thick with emotion, "that invoice was the greatest gift you could have given us. Not because it made us feel guilty, though it certainly did that, but because it forced us to see you clearly, perhaps for the first time since we became adults. So today," Malia continued, "we're not just celebrating your birthday. We're celebrating your courage to disrupt patterns that weren't serving any of us. Your wisdom in knowing that true love sometimes requires difficult truths. Your persistence in believing we could become better than we were. And we're celebrating your renaissance," Nanny concluded with a bright smile. "Your return to education. Your community leadership, your reclaimed joy. You're not just our mother, you're our inspiration, showing us that it's never too late to begin again, to prioritize purpose over obligation, to demand the respect and recognition you deserve." Kai raised his glass higher. "To Leilani Kealoha, mother, student, teacher, community leader, and the woman who sent an invoice that changed everything. Happy birthday, Mom. The debt we owe you can never be repaid with money, only with love, respect, and the commitment to carry your lessons forward." To Leilani, the gathering echoed, glasses raising in unison. As the celebration continued into the evening, with traditional Hawaiian music, hula performances by local keiki, and endless talk story circles under the stars, Leilani found herself drawn to the shoreline. Slipping off her sandals, she walked to where gentle waves lapped at the sand, the full moon casting a silver path across the water. Dr. Wong appeared beside her, having observed her quiet departure from the festivities. "Enjoying your moment?" the therapist asked with a gentle smile. "Savoring it," Leilani corrected. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Not just the party, but the authentic connection behind it. The real presence of my children in my life, not out of obligation, but from genuine desire." "You created this reality," Dr. Wong reminded her, "by having the courage to disrupt patterns that weren't serving any of you." The invoice, Leilani laughed softly. "Such a desperate measure. I remember how my hands shook when I pressed send." "It was desperate," Dr. Wong acknowledged. "But sometimes transformation requires disruption. The system you had established, one where you gave endlessly and they took unconsciously, was too entrenched for gentle interventions. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the play of moonlight on water. "What's been most surprising about this past year?" Dr. Wong asked. Leilani considered the question carefully. "That standing up for myself didn't drive them away, it brought them closer. I spent decades afraid that if I stopped giving everything, if I established boundaries, if I asked for reciprocity, I would lose them. The opposite happened. They respect me more now that I respect myself." "That's often how it works, Dr. Wong observed. "We teach others how to treat us by what we allow, what we emphasize, what we reinforce. You taught your children, through years of self-sacrifice, that your needs were secondary. When you finally declared otherwise, you gave them the opportunity to rise to a higher standard of relationship. And they did," Leilani said with quiet pride. "Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but they rose to the challenge. Because you believed they could," Dr. Wong replied. "You saw their potential for growth, even when their behavior suggested otherwise." Back at the celebration, Kai was searching for his mother, wanting to share a particular guest's arrival. He spotted her at the shoreline with Dr. Wong and hesitated, not wanting to interrupt what appeared to be a meaningful conversation. As he watched, he was struck by his mother's transformed presence, the straight shoulders, the animated gestures, the evident engagement with life that had been dimmed a year ago. His phone buzzed with a text from Malia. "Found Mom talking with Dr. Wong by the water," he typed back. "Give them a minute." He used the pause to reflect on his own journey over the past year. The invoice had been just the beginning, a shock to his system that forced him to confront his sense of entitlement. The real work had happened in the months that followed. As he gradually learned to see his mother as a person separate from her role in his life, with her own desires, fears, and right to self-determination. The business crisis with his boat had been a turning point. Instead of seeking rescue, he had found solutions, accepted appropriate help, and discovered resilience he hadn't known he possessed. The experience had transformed not just his relationship with Leilani but his approach to life's challenges. His boat tour business was now more diversified and sustainable, offering both ocean and land experiences that showcased Hawaii's cultural and natural richness. He had developed partnerships with cultural practitioners, environmental scientists, and local food producers to create experiences that benefited the entire community, not just his bottom line. Most importantly, he had begun to find balance between work and personal fulfillment, between ambition and presence, between independence and healthy interdependence. He was learning, albeit imperfectly, the lesson his mother had tried to teach through the invoice, that true value isn't measured in financial transactions but in mutual respect and genuine connection. Malia joined him at the edge of the celebration, her practiced physician's eyes taking in the scene at the shoreline. "She looks happy," she observed. "Truly happy, not the performed contentment she maintained for so long." "She is happy," Kai agreed. "And she's earned it." Like her brother, Malia had undergone profound transformation since the invoice. The reduction in her surgical hours had initially felt like failure to her achievement-oriented mindset. But the space created by that choice had allowed for unexpected growth, deeper connections with patients, innovative teaching approaches for medical students, and even research into integrating traditional Hawaiian healing practices with Western medicine. She had begun to recognize how her clinical detachment, so valuable in the operating room, had become a barrier in personal relationships. Through ongoing therapy and deliberate practice, she was learning to access her emotions, to express vulnerability, to remain present with discomfort rather than intellectualizing it away. Most significantly, she had started a support group for physicians struggling with burnout and compassion fatigue, creating a space where healthcare providers could acknowledge the emotional toll of their work without judgment. What had begun as a small gathering in her living room had grown into a formal program adopted by her hospital, with Malia emerging as an unexpected advocate for physician well-being. "Remember when we used to compete for Mom's attention?" she asked Kai, thinking back to childhood dynamics that had carried into their adult relationships. "And resources," Kai added wryly. "Who could extract the most support while giving the least in return? What a waste of energy," Malia reflected. "Imagine if we had channeled that competitiveness into collaboration instead." "We're learning now," Kai said, watching as Nanny approached their mother at the shoreline, carrying what appeared to be a wrapped gift. Better late than never. Nanny, too, had undergone remarkable evolution since the invoice confrontation. Her return to Hawaii had been more than a geographical relocation, it represented a reconciliation with her cultural identity, an integration of the parts of herself she had once perceived as contradictory. Her app for Hawaiian language and cultural preservation had moved from concept to reality, securing both grant funding and private investment. Leilani shook her head, touched but determined to redirect their gratitude. "Don't give me all the credit. Each of you had to make your own choices, face your own truths. I just created the context for that reckoning. By sending us an invoice. For $500,000, Kai laughed, the memory now more amusing than painful. Whatever works, Leilani said with a mischievous smile that reminded them of the woman she had been before grief and loneliness had dimmed her spirit, playful, determined, wise beyond her years but youthful in her approach to life. As they walked along the beach after dinner, the stars emerging in a sky undimmed by city lights, Leilani shared one more decision she had been contemplating. I'm thinking of going back to school, she said, her voice both nervous and excited. The University of Hawaii has a program in Indigenous education that aligns with work I've been doing informally, preserving traditional knowledge and integrating it into contemporary teaching methods. Mom, that's fantastic. Nanny exclaimed, the first to respond. You'd be amazing at that. You think so? At my age? Leilani's question revealed a vulnerability her children rarely saw, her own doubts about starting a new chapter when many of her peers were settling into quiet retirement. Age is just another form of diversity in the classroom, Malia said, her medical perspective shifting to a broader view of human development. You bring wisdom and experience that younger students can learn from, just as you can learn from their fresh perspectives. Plus, think of the connections you already have in the community, Kai added practically. You'd start with a network most students spend years building. Leilani felt tears spring to her eyes, moved by their immediate support for her dream, a dream she had deferred for decades while prioritizing theirs. Thank you, she said simply. It means more than you know to have your encouragement. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of waves creating a soothing backdrop for contemplation. The moon cast a silver path across the water, a reminder of the Hawaiian navigators who had found these islands by following stars and currents, trusting ancient wisdom while venturing into unknown futures. You know, Malia said thoughtfully, that invoice was actually a gift. A very expensive gift, Kai quipped, but his tone was light. No, really, Malia insisted. It forced us to see what we'd been blind to, the full measure of what we'd received and what we'd failed to give in return. It wasn't about the money at all. It was about recognition, Nanny agreed. About making visible what had become invisible through familiarity and expectation. And about boundaries, Leilani added. About distinguishing between healthy interdependence and unhealthy entitlement. The waves continued their eternal conversation with the shore, a reminder that relationships, like tides, require both advance and retreat, both giving and receiving, both constancy and change. As they turned to head back toward the lights of Lahaina town, Leilani looked at her three children, no longer extensions of herself but distinct individuals finding their own paths while remaining connected to their shared roots. The invoice that had seemed so drastic, so confrontational, had ultimately been an act of love, not just for them, but for herself. It had demanded recognition not only of what she had given, but of who she was beyond giving. It had established her worth not as a function of maternal sacrifice, but as an inherent quality of her humanity. So, Kai asked with a grin as they approached their parked cars, does this mean we can tear up the invoice now? Keep it, Leilani advised with a smile that held both wisdom and mischief. Frame it, even. Let it remind you that some debts can never be repaid with money, only with love, respect, and the courage to grow beyond old patterns. As they embraced in the moonlight, promising to reconnect in 3 months on another island, Leilani felt the sweet certainty that they were building something new together, a family defined not by obligation or entitlement, but by mutual respect and genuine connection. The invoice had been paid in full, not with dollars, but with something far more valuable, the currency of transformation. 1 year after the infamous $500,000 invoice that had transformed the Kealoha family, Leilani stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the lei of fragrant plumeria around her neck. Today marked not only her 63rd birthday but also her completion of the first year in the University of Hawaii's Indigenous Education program. The woman who gazed back at her from the mirror barely resembled the lonely, resigned person she had been 12 months ago. Her eyes sparkled with purpose, her posture radiated confidence, and the silver in her hair seemed less a mark of age than a crown of wisdom earned. You did it, Lei, she whispered to her reflection, using the nickname Keone had always called her. You reclaimed your life. The celebration awaiting her at Kamakona's beachside restaurant had been organized entirely by her children, a testament to how profoundly their relationships had evolved. No reminders had been necessary, no hints dropped. Instead, Kai had called weeks ago to secure the date, Malia had handled the guest list and logistics, and Nanny had created digital invitations featuring animated hula dancers that somehow incorporated photos from each decade of Leilani's life. As she drove along the coastal highway, windows down to let the tropical breeze flow through the car, Leilani reflected on the year's transformations. The quarterly family gatherings had continued, rotating between islands as planned. But what had begun as structured reconciliation efforts had evolved into genuinely anticipated reunions, with each child taking turns planning experiences that reflected their unique personalities and reconnected them all to their Hawaiian heritage. Kai had led them on a sunrise hike to witness the endangered Ueukani birds nesting on remote cliffs. Malia had organized a traditional La'olapo workshop, where they learned about medicinal Hawaiian plants from an elder practitioner. Nani had taken them to a technology conference focused on indigenous innovation, where they witnessed the powerful intersection of ancient wisdom and modern tools. For her part, Leilani had brought them back to basics, a day spent tending a taro patch in the sacred Waipio Valley, reconnecting with the staple food that had sustained their ancestors for generations. As they had worked side by side in the mud, she shared stories of their grandparents and great-grandparents, weaving their individual journeys into a larger tapestry of family and cultural identity. But the true evolution had happened in the spaces between these organized gatherings, in weekly phone calls that came without prompting, in thoughtful text messages checking in without asking for anything, in the gradual rebuilding of trust through consistent presence rather than occasional crisis management. Arriving at Kamakona's, Leilani was greeted by the sound of slack key guitar and children's laughter. The restaurant's outdoor seating area had been transformed with twinkling lights, tropical flowers, and photographs hanging from ribbons attached to palm trees, a visual timeline of her life that brought tears to her eyes before she even reached the entrance. Surprise, voices called out as she approached, though it wasn't technically a surprise party, just a gathering of loved ones eager to celebrate her. Kai stepped forward first, handsome in a traditional Hawaiian shirt, the stress lines around his eyes softened since he had found sustainable balance in his business and personal life. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, embracing her with the strength and gentleness that reminded her so much of Keone. 63 years young and putting college students half your age to shame, from what I hear. Leilani laughed, accepting the compliment without deflection, another change from the woman who had once minimized her accomplishments to elevate others. "The professors say I bring valuable life perspective to discussions. I think that's academic code for she's old enough to remember what she's teaching about." Malia appeared next, looking relaxed in a flowing sundress, a marked contrast to the crisp, professional attire that had once been her uniform even on family occasions. "You're bringing exactly what those classrooms need," she said, kissing her mother's cheek. A bridge between theory and lived experience. Nani completed the welcome, her purple hair now accented with traditional Hawaiian tattoos that symbolized her reclaimed cultural identity. "The guest of honor has arrived," she announced, guiding Leilani to a seat of honor decorated with handwoven lahala mats. "And wait until you see what we've planned." The gathering represented every facet of Leilani's life, fellow teachers from her decades in education, neighbors who had become like family, students from her university program, cultural practitioners she had worked with on community projects, and even Dr. Helena Wong, whose therapy sessions had evolved from crisis intervention to growth-oriented counseling for the entire family. As the celebration unfolded, Leilani noticed something remarkable. Her children were not just present but fully engaged, not just participating but hosting with genuine joy. Kai moved among the guests, making introductions and ensuring everyone had fresh drinks. Malia had prepared a slideshow featuring highlights from Leilani's academic papers and community work over the past year. Nani had created an interactive digital guestbook where attendees could record video messages for Leilani to treasure later. Present in a way they hadn't been for years. "So," Nani asked with a tentative smile, "does this mean we don't have to pay the invoice?" Leilani laughed, a genuine sound that carried across the garden to the ocean beyond. "The invoice was never about money. It was about value, recognizing the value of what we give each other, not taking it for granted." I get that now, Kai said, his voice uncharacteristically reflective. And I'm sorry it took something so dramatic to make me see it. Sometimes, Leilani said, looking up at the emerging stars, the same stars that had guided her ancestors. Across the Pacific, we need to be shaken awake before we can begin to change. The night air carried the scent of plumeria and salt, of birthday candles and new beginnings. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations, more therapy sessions, more negotiation of boundaries and expectations. The path forward wouldn't be smooth or straight. But tonight, for the first time in years, Leilani felt truly seen by her children, not just as a mother, not just as a resource, but as a woman with her own journey, her own needs, her own light to shine. And that, she realized as she looked at the faces of her children illuminated by starlight, was worth more than any invoice could ever capture. The first real test of their fragile reconciliation came 3 weeks later when Kai's boat, the Maka Koa, named after his grandfather, suffered catastrophic engine failure during a whale-watching tour. No one was injured, but the vessel had to be towed back to harbor, the tourists refunded, and Kai's already struggling business faced a financial crisis that threatened to sink it completely. In the past, his first call would have been to Leilani, asking for another loan, another bailout, another sacrifice from his mother to keep his dream afloat. This time, he sat on the dock long after the disappointed tourists had departed, watching the sunset paint the harbor waters in shades of fire, and contemplated what it meant to be truly self-sufficient. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he scrolled through his contacts. His finger hovered over Leilani's name, muscle memory nearly taking over before he consciously moved past it. Instead, he called his bank, his insurance company, and finally, the small business association that had helped him establish his company 5 years earlier. Only after exploring every other option did he call his mother, not to ask for money, but simply to share his struggle. The mechanic says it'll cost $35,000 to replace the engines, he told her, his voice tight with stress but determined. I've applied for an emergency business loan, and I'm selling my truck to cover immediate expenses. On the other end of the line, Leilani felt a surge of emotion, pride mingled with concern, relief tangled with maternal worry. Her son was facing adversity with maturity she hadn't seen in him before. That sounds like a solid plan, she said, resisting the urge to offer financial help. How are you feeling about it all? The question, focused on his emotional state rather than practical solutions, caught Kai off guard. Scared, he admitted after a pause. Embarrassed. But also, I don't know, determined? Like this is a test I need to pass on my own. It is, Leilani agreed. And you can? I was thinking, Kai said hesitantly, maybe you could help in a different way. Not with money, he added quickly. But you know everyone on this island. Your students and their parents, people from church, your neighbors, maybe you could help spread the word that I'm offering land-based eco-tours until the boat is fixed? Cultural experiences, hiking to hidden waterfalls, traditional plant medicine workshops, things that don't require a vessel but still showcase the real Hawaii. Leilani smiled, though Kai couldn't see it through the phone. This was a different kind of asking, a request for connection, for community support, for the social capital she had built over decades of teaching and serving her island. I would be honored to help that way, she said warmly. In fact, I'm having lunch tomorrow with Mrs. Kealoha, you remember, she owns those vacation rentals on the North Shore? I'm sure her guests would love authentic Hawaiian experiences beyond the typical tourist activities. By the end of the week, Kai's land-based tours were fully booked for the next month, thanks to Leilani's network of connections. More importantly, he had begun to understand the difference between dependency and interdependence, between expecting rescue and accepting community support that he would, in turn, offer to others. Meanwhile in Honolulu, Malia faced her own reckoning. The condominium she'd been eyeing, a sleek high-rise with views of Diamond Head, walking distance to the hospital, had another offer pending. The real estate agent called with an ultimatum. Come up with the full down payment within 48 hours or lose the property. In the past, she would have immediately called Leilani, framing her request as an investment in her future, an indirect benefit to the family, a logical financial decision that any rational parent would support. Now, sitting in the quiet of her hospital office between surgeries, Malia found herself questioning the urgency that had driven her for so long. Did she truly need this particular condominium, with its premium location and luxury amenities? Or was it, like so many of her acquisitions, another attempt to fill some unnamed emptiness with material success? Dr. Wong's assignment, to ask her mother 3 meaningful questions each day and truly listen to the answers, had gradually shifted something in Malia's perspective. Over the past weeks, she had learned more about Leilani than she had known. In years, that her mother had secretly always wanted to study marine biology but had chosen teaching as a more practical path to support her family, that she still wrote poetry in the early mornings before sunrise, that she had been quietly volunteering at a shelter for domestically abused women, offering Hawaiian healing practices to help them reconnect with their bodies after trauma. These glimpses into Leilani's inner world had reminded Malia that her mother was not just a support system but a complex human being with dreams deferred, wisdom earned, and purpose that extended far beyond motherhood. When she finally called Leilani that evening, it wasn't about the condo at all. "I've been thinking about purpose," Malia said without preamble. "About the difference between success and meaning." "That's quite a philosophical turn for my scientific daughter," Leilani observed, pleasantly surprised. "What prompted this reflection?" Malia described the condo situation, her automatic impulse to secure it at any cost, and the moment of clarity that had followed. "I realized I've been collecting achievements and possessions like medical credentials, as if having enough of them would somehow prove my worth." "And what do you think defines your worth, if not those things?" Leilani asked, genuinely curious about her daughter's evolving perspective. Malia was silent for so long that Leilani wondered if the connection had dropped. Finally, she said, "I'm not sure yet. But I've decided to let the condo go. I'm going to stay in my current apartment another year and use the time to figure out what really matters to me, beyond career advancement and material acquisitions." "That sounds like a wise choice," Leilani said softly, recognizing the courage it took for her achievement-oriented daughter to step back from the relentless pursuit of more. "I've also decided to reduce my hours at the hospital," Malia continued, each word carrying the weight of a major life recalibration. "I've accepted a part-time position teaching at the medical school. Less prestige, less money, but more meaning. I want to shape the next generation of doctors to see patients as whole people, not just interesting medical cases." Leilani felt tears spring to her eyes, hearing in her daughter's words an echo of her own life philosophy, the belief in service, in passing knowledge forward, in valuing human connection above material wealth. "Your father would be so proud of this decision," she said. "He always said you had a teacher's heart beneath your surgeon's hands." "Did he? I never knew that." Malia's voice held wonder at this revelation about how her father had seen her. "Tell me more about what Dad thought about my path." And so began another conversation, deeper, richer, more connected than their typical exchanges about schedules and achievements. As they talked into the night, Malia felt something shift within her, as if puzzle pieces of her identity were finally finding their proper alignment. On the mainland, Nanny faced her own crisis of belonging. The tech startup where she'd been working announced another restructuring, eliminating her position along with dozens of others. After 3 years in Seattle, she found herself at a crossroads: compete for another tech job in the cutthroat mainland market, or consider other paths that might better align with her evolving sense of self. Dr. Wong's assignment, to share something meaningful from her life with her mother each day, had reconnected Nanny with parts of herself she'd been suppressing in her quest to become thoroughly mainland. She'd told Leilani about the Hawaiian language classes she'd been secretly taking online, her growing discomfort with the tech industry's values, her longing for community that went deeper than networking events and professional conferences. Now, facing unemployment, Nanny found herself drawn back to the islands in ways that surprised her. Not from financial necessity or failure, but from a growing recognition that she had been running away from, rather than toward, her truest self. When she called Leilani this time, it wasn't to ask for money or a place to stay, but to explore possibilities. "I've been thinking about coming home," she said carefully. "Not to live with you," she clarified quickly, "but to reconnect with Hawaii. Maybe start something of my own that brings together my tech skills and our cultural heritage." "What kind of something?" Leilani asked, intrigued by this new direction. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I've been developing this app prototype that helps preserve and teach Hawaiian language and culture." Nanny's voice gained enthusiasm as she described her vision: an interactive platform that would make Hawaiian knowledge accessible to the diaspora community, educational institutions, and respectful visitors wanting deeper cultural understanding. "That sounds like important work," Leilani said, hearing the passion in her youngest child's voice. "A way of bridging worlds rather than choosing between them." "Exactly. I don't have to reject technology to embrace my Hawaiian identity, or abandon my roots to be successful in tech. I can create something new at the intersection." As they discussed possibilities, potential partnerships with cultural practitioners, educational institutions, tourism authorities that wanted more authentic Hawaiian content, Leilani marveled at the transformation in her youngest child. Nanny had always been searching for her place, feeling caught between island traditions and mainland opportunities. Now she was finding her own path, one that honored both. "If you're serious about this venture," Leilani said thoughtfully, "I know some people you should talk to. Cultural experts, language kumu, even potential investors who care about preserving Hawaiian knowledge. You'd help me network? Nani sounded surprised. Of course, Leilani replied. That's what family does, we connect each other to opportunities. Not by giving handouts, but by opening doors to rooms where you can demonstrate your own value. 2 months after the invoice that had shaken their family system, the Kealohas gathered again on Maui, not in crisis this time, but in purposeful reunion. They had agreed to meet quarterly, rotating between islands, to maintain the fragile new connections they were building and to continue their family therapy with Dr. Wong via video when they couldn't all be in the same location. This time, they met at Ho'okipa Beach Park, where Kai had organized a family outrigger canoe experience, a return to the traditional Hawaiian way of navigating waters together, each person with their own role but dependent on collective rhythm and effort. As they carried the canoe to the water's edge, Kai at the front, Malia and Nani in the middle, Leilani at the rear, the metaphor wasn't lost on any of them. They were learning to move in harmony again, to face the same direction, to trust each other's strength. Remember, Kai instructed as they prepared to launch, we paddle on opposite sides for balance. We switch sides only when I call the command. We move forward only when we're all in sync. Once on the water, the familiar motion returned to them, muscles remembering what the mind had forgotten, the pull and glide of paddles creating momentum that carried them beyond the breaking waves into open water. Look, Malia called out, pointing to where a sea turtle surfaced nearby, its ancient face regarding them with timeless wisdom before disappearing beneath the surface. Honu, Nani whispered, using the Hawaiian name. Good luck for our voyage. They paddled in silence for a while, finding their collective rhythm, adjusting to the ocean swells. The late afternoon sun cast long golden paths across the water, and the island behind them seemed both shelter and launching point. I've been thinking about that invoice, Kai said finally, his voice carrying over the sound of their paddles cutting through water. Not about the money, but about the value. What do you mean? Leilani asked from her position at the back of the canoe. Value isn't just what something costs, it's what it's worth. He switched his paddle to the other side, calling out the command for everyone to follow suit. Mom, what you gave us goes beyond dollars. You gave us roots and wings, foundation. And freedom. How do we repay that kind of gift? You don't repay it, Leilani said thoughtfully. You pay it forward. I like that, Malia joined in. We honor what we've received by giving it to others in our own way. Like the concept of kuleana, Nani added, using the Hawaiian word for responsibility and privilege. We're stewards of what we've been given, not owners. Leilani felt her heart expand with each insight shared. These were not the entitled children who had demanded financial support just months ago. These were evolving adults grappling with deeper truths about reciprocity, legacy, and intergenerational responsibility. As they turned the canoe to head back to shore, navigating through gentle swells, Leilani shared a decision she had been contemplating since their first therapy session. I've decided to create a family foundation, she announced. Not to provide ongoing financial support to any of you, but to formalize how our family's resources can benefit the community and future generations. All 3 children looked back at her with varying expressions of surprise and curiosity. I've been talking with financial advisors and estate planners, Leilani continued. The foundation will have specific funding areas aligned with our family values, education, environmental conservation, cultural preservation, and healthcare access for underserved populations. That sounds amazing, Mom, Malia said. A way to extend our family's impact beyond ourselves. Here's the important part, Leilani said, meeting each of their gazes in turn. Each of you will serve on the board, helping make decisions about grants and initiatives. But there's a condition: the foundation will not make grants to any board members' personal projects or businesses. This isn't about funding your individual endeavors, it's about collectively supporting our broader community. Kai nodded slowly, understanding the boundaries she was establishing. So if I wanted foundation support for my eco-tours, I'd need to recuse myself from the board. Exactly, Leilani confirmed. This creates a clear separation between family support and foundation work. It ensures we're making decisions based on community impact, not personal gain. I love this approach, Nani said enthusiastically. It's a way for us to work together as equals, focusing outward instead of on our own needs. And it teaches us to find funding for our personal projects through legitimate business channels, Malia added pragmatically. Loans, investors, grants from other foundations, not family resources. As they guided the canoe back to shore, working in unison against the incoming waves, Leilani felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The invoice had been a desperate measure, a shock to disrupt patterns that had become destructive. The foundation represented something more sustainable, a structure that honored both autonomy and connection, both individual growth and collective responsibility. That evening, they gathered at a local restaurant that had been a family favorite since the children were small. The open-air setting offered views of the sunset over neighboring islands, and the menu featured contemporary interpretations of traditional Hawaiian dishes, another metaphor for their evolving family dynamic, honoring the past while creating something new. Over dinner, they each shared updates on their personal journeys. Kai had secured a small business loan to repair his boat, supplemented by the money from selling his truck. His land-based eco-tours had been so successful that he was considering making them a permanent part of his business model, creating year-round stability regardless of ocean conditions. I've realized I was too fixated on doing things exactly one way, he reflected. There are multiple paths to sharing Hawaii's beauty and culture with visitors. Flexibility doesn't mean failure, it means wisdom. Malia had officially reduced her surgical hours and begun teaching medical students. The pay cut had required lifestyle adjustments, but the rewards of mentoring young doctors had filled a void she hadn't realized existed. One of my students told me yesterday that I'd changed how she sees patients, as whole people with stories, not just interesting medical puzzles, she shared, her usual clinical detachment softened by genuine emotion. That moment was worth more than any condo or career advancement. Nanny had returned to Hawaii, not to Maui but to Oahu, where she'd found shared workspace in a technology hub focused on indigenous innovation. Her cultural preservation app had attracted interest from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and she was assembling a team that included both tech experts and cultural practitioners. I'm not running away anymore, she said, twirling her fork in her hapia pie. I'm running towards something meaningful, a future that honors both my Hawaiian roots and my technological skills. Leilani listened to each update with a full heart, seeing in her children's evolving paths echoes of her own journey, the search for purpose, the tension between security and meaning, the gradual alignment of external choices with internal values. I'm proud of each of you, she said when they had all shared. Not for your achievements, but for your growth. For the courage to question patterns that weren't serving you. For the willingness to build something new. We had a good teacher, Kai said, raising his glass in a toast. The best, Malia agreed. Even when we didn't realize we were being taught, Nanny added with a rueful smile. She had assembled a team of developers, cultural practitioners, and educational experts to create a platform that made indigenous knowledge accessible while respecting protocols around sacred information. More personally, she had begun the process of rediscovering her place within Hawaiian tradition, learning chants and protocols, studying genealogy, practicing traditional arts like lauhala weaving and kapa making. The mainland sophistication she had once cultivated as armor against island limitations had been replaced by a more integrated identity that honored both innovation and tradition. On the shoreline, Nanny presented Leilani with the wrapped package. This couldn't wait until the formal gift-giving, she explained. It's from all three of us. Leilani carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a beautifully bound book with a hand-carved koa wood cover. The title, engraved in both Hawaiian and English, read, "Priceless, the True Value of Family." Opening the cover, she found a letter. On the first page, signed by all three of her children, "Dear Mom, 1 year ago, you sent us an invoice that forced us to confront our entitlement, our lack of gratitude, and our failure to recognize your wholeness beyond motherhood. That $500,000 statement became the most valuable document our family has ever received, not because of the amount due, but because of the truth it revealed. This book represents our response. Not a payment, because as you taught us, some debts can never be settled with money. Instead, it's a recognition of the countless ways you have enriched our lives, and a commitment to the family we are becoming together. Each page contains a memory, a lesson, or a promise, contributions from everyone whose life you've touched as mother, teacher, friend, student, community member, and cultural bridge builder. Some entries will make you laugh, others might bring tears, but all of them reflect the immeasurable impact you've had simply by being authentically, unapologetically Leilani. The final section contains our pledges for the coming year, specific commitments each of us is making to continue building a family defined by mutual respect, genuine connection, and shared purpose. These aren't vague intentions but concrete actions, with accountability measures we've developed with Dr. Wong's guidance. Mom, the invoice you sent was for the past, for all you had given that we had taken for granted. This book is for the future, for all we will create together now that we truly see each other. With deepest gratitude and love, Kai, Malia, and Nanny. Leilani pressed the book to her heart, too moved for words. Around her, the three most important people in her life formed a protective circle, their shadows merging in the moonlight to create a single, unified shape on the sand. Thank you, she whispered finally. This means everything. No, Mom, Kai said gently. You mean everything. Not because of what you give us or do for us, but simply because of who you are. As they walked back to the celebration together, arm in arm along the moonlit shore, Leilani reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a desperate act of self-advocacy. The invoice, that radical demand for recognition, had catalyzed not just a family reckoning but a personal renaissance. In standing up for her worth, she had rediscovered her purpose. In demanding respect from her children, she had reclaimed respect for herself. In refusing to remain invisible, she had found new visibility not just within her family but in her community and academic circles. The gathering awaiting them represented this expanded identity, no longer defined solely by motherhood but by the full expression of her gifts, passions, and connections. Fellow students who valued her cultural knowledge. Community leaders who sought her wisdom on Indigenous education initiatives. Friends who appreciated her for herself, not just for what she could offer them. And at the center of it all, her 3 children, now partners in creating a family system based on mutual respect rather than one-way sacrifice. Not perfect, still learning, occasionally slipping into old patterns, but fundamentally transformed by their willingness to see her, and themselves, more clearly. As they rejoined the celebration, the band began playing a traditional Hawaiian birthday song. Guests formed a circle, creating space in the center for Leilani and her children. Kai, Malia, and Nanny surrounded their mother, each placing a fresh lei around her neck, 3 fragrant circles of flowers symbolizing unbroken connection, enduring love, and renewed commitment. In this moment of honor, surrounded by symbols of the life she had built and the relationships she had transformed, Leilani felt a presence beside her, not physical but unmistakable. Keone, watching over their family's healing with pride. "You see, my love," she whispered to his spirit. "They finally learned what you always tried to teach them. That love isn't just taking care of someone, it's seeing them completely." Later that night, after the last guests had departed and her children had returned to their accommodations with promises to reconvene for breakfast, Leilani sat alone on her lanai. The book her children had created lay open in her lap, its pages illuminated by soft porch light as she slowly read through the contributions, messages from former students now leading their own classrooms, notes from neighbors whose lives she had touched through quiet acts of kindness, reflections from community elders who valued her work preserving cultural knowledge. One entry in particular caught her attention, a message from Akela Mahalana, the home health aide whose observation about her forgotten birthday had been the catalyst for everything that followed. "Dear Leilani, when I asked where your family was on your birthday last year, I had no idea my question would set in motion such profound change. I simply couldn't understand how someone who had given so much could be so overlooked on her special day. What you did next, sending that now legendary invoice, was one of the bravest acts I've ever witnessed. Not because it was confrontational, though it certainly was that, but because it declared your inherent worth in a world that too often renders aging women invisible. You showed me, and everyone fortunate enough to know your story, that it's never too late to establish boundaries, to demand recognition, to insist on reciprocity in relationships. You demonstrated that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for authentic connection. As I work with other kupuna in our community, I share your example, with permission, of course. You'd be amazed how many have found their own voice after hearing about your courage." One client even created an invoice for her adult son who had been living in her home rent-free for years while criticizing her housekeeping. Another finally told her daughter she could no longer provide unlimited childcare while her own health needs went unaddressed. Your ripples of influence extend far beyond your own family, Leilani. You've started a quiet revolution of self-respect among women who have spent lifetimes putting everyone else first. Happy birthday to a true pioneer, not just in cultural education, but in showing us all how to age with dignity, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge of our own worth. With admiration and affection, Akela Leilani closed the book gently, tears of gratitude tracking down her cheeks. She had never intended to become an example for others, she had simply reached her breaking point and responded with the only tool that seemed powerful enough to penetrate years of entrenched family dynamics. Yet in that moment of desperate self-advocacy, she had indeed created ripples that continued to expand outward, touching lives beyond her immediate circle. The invoice that had seemed so extreme, so confrontational, had become a symbol of something universal, the right of every person, regardless of age or role, to be seen, valued, and respected. As she prepared for bed, Leilani placed the book on her nightstand beside the framed copy of the invoice her children had indeed mounted, just as she had suggested a year ago. The juxtaposition told the story of their journey, from transactional entitlement to genuine appreciation, from obligation to choice, from taking for granted to profound gratitude. The invoice had never been about the money. It had been about recognition, of her sacrifice, her personhood, her inherent worth beyond what she could give or do for others. The $500,000 figure had simply been large enough to command attention, to disrupt patterns too entrenched for gentle intervention. The true payment had come in the form of transformed relationships, mutual respect, and the joy of being truly seen by the people she loved most in the world. That was a return on investment beyond any price tag, a dividend of authenticity that would continue to enrich all their lives in the years to come. As she drifted toward sleep, Leilani whispered a prayer of gratitude for the crisis that had precipitated healing, the courage that had made it possible, and the love that had ultimately transcended entitlement to create something genuine and sustainable. The invoice had been settled not with currency but with connection, and that made it the most valuable transaction of her life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.